Hello, I'm Amelia Lefebvre. I'm going to teach you a little bit about death penalty law today. Did you know that executions peaked in the U.S. in 1935? And what do you think are our most common methods of execution? Well, up until about 1950, hanging dominated as the preferred method of execution. But in the 20th century, electrocution gained a lot of popularity. You can sort of see my graph here. The yellow section represents electrocution. And then we zoom in on the recent trends. There was a big drop off for a few years in the 70s, and recently our preferred method of execution is lethal injection. Okay. I'll give you a little bit of overview about the history of the way the death penalty has been used in the U.S. So primarily I'm going to focus on what's happened since 1970 when the death penalty was reinstated by the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, but early on, to give you some background, the first U.S. Congress established the death penalty in 1790. In 1852, only a little more than 60 years later, Rhode Island was the first state to ban the death penalty for any reason. Then there followed a few different periods where several states abolished the death penalty over a short period of time, in the early 1900s and then again in the 1950s and 60s. In 1972, death penalty was temporarily banned federally by the Supreme Court because it was found to be unconstitutional the way it was administered. 4 short years later, 1976, the death penalty is reinstated in the U.S. Since 1976, there have been several limitations and also expansions of the death penalty. So on the one hand, in 1977, death penalty was found to be too severe a punishment for rape. But then in 1982, Texas performed the first lethal injection in the country. In the 1980s, the death penalty was then found to be too severe a punishment for accessory to murder, prisoners who were considered insane, and it also was no longer allowed for prisoners under 16. Then in the 1990s, the U.S. Supreme Court helped to push through an execution in California, and also the death penalty was expanded to a judge's ability, to change the death penalty was expanded with President Clinton's crime bill. And then in 2000, it was found that Texas led the country and the world with the most executions. Another restriction in 2002, mentally retarded prisoners were not allowed to be executed anymore. In 2007, the General Assembly of the United Nations called for a global moratorium on the death penalty. Obviously, we didn't adhere to that. Today, over half of our states do operate with the death penalty. 27 states still administer the death penalty in the U.S. 19 states have banned it, including New York. And there are 4 states that have moratoria, meaning it's still legal to carry out the death penalty, but the governor has placed a temporary stop on it. New York abolished the death penalty in 2004, but nationally death sentences are decreasing. Looking at the future of the death penalty, there's a few different things to consider. Recent legal challenges have focused on problems with the injection process. There was a major drug maker that stopped producing one of the drugs that's necessary to complete the 3-step injection process, lethal injection process. So that's created some roadblocks. States have been trying to come up with new drug cocktails, as they call them. And in some places that's been blocked because the effects on the prisoners are unknown and sometimes very painful and awful. So States have responded in different ways to these problems. Some states have restricted the death penalty, as I said, because it's considered cruel and unusual to sort of experiment on people this way. Some other states have responded in a completely different way by bringing back old execution methods so that they continue executing people, even though there's problems with the injection process. Some U.S. Supreme Court justices have questioned the very constitutionality of the death penalty itself. So there's possibility in the future that the death penalty could be restricted further, but there's also evidence showing that that people will be pushing to expand it as well. Thank you so much for your time today.